Every year, human trafficking rakes in over $150 billion, exploiting the lives of more than 25 million people worldwide. This illegal business has trapped women, children, and men in unthinkable situations, moving them around like currency and their freedom, taken by people who profit from selling their bodies, their labor, and their dignity. From what we can see, these numbers reveal a hidden world of suffering and exploitation. Traffickers prey on the most vulnerable by taking use of fear, control, and secrecy behind locked doors and in dimly lit alleys. These operations are not isolated incidents that take place in distant locations. Rather, they frequently occur right in front of us and are woven into society in ways that are both incredibly unsettling and remarkably invisible. The modern equivalent of slavery is human trafficking. Under circumstances that leave them with few options, victims are persuaded, threatened, and tricked into forced labor, sexual exploitation, and servitude. Traffickers take advantage of everybody they can, taking advantage of situations like poverty, displacement, and desperation. This isn't exclusive to any particular group of people, culture, or geographic area. They frequently manipulate the hopes of people who need a way out of their difficulties by making promises of better jobs or chances. When we talk about human trafficking, we're not just speaking of people robbed of their freedom, we're talking about entire communities scarred by this cycle of exploitation, where families are torn apart and trust in society is eroded. So follow us as we journey through these illegal operations involved in human trafficking. Human trafficking is not new. Its origin can be traced back centuries, rooted in forms of forced labor and slavery that were accepted parts of society. Slavery was outlawed in much of the world over time, but human exploitation only changed. Trafficking developed into a criminal enterprise that expanded into an intricate worldwide network. Modern trafficking is hidden, cloaked in secrecy, and intricately organized, in contrast to earlier types of servitude that were frequently exposed to the public. This change from overt exploitation to covert operations made it possible for it to spread covertly around the world. Traffickers now have great tools thanks to globalization and technology. Communication and transportation innovations made it possible for organized crime to link and manage trafficking networks across great distances. Nowadays, traffickers work through a network of people, many of whom never really meet. Due to the high demand for inexpensive labor and the minimal chance of detection, human trafficking has become a lucrative industry. Traffickers exploit offshore banks and internet networks to create an empire that is hard to track down, with victims hiding in plain sight. Traffickers today control the circumstances that lead individuals to be exploited. They take advantage of worldwide disparities, promising victims a way out of poverty but trapping them instead. There are now major trafficking lines that connect countries like Brazil to Europe, and traffickers use businesses that appear authentic as fronts. Trafficked women are moved under the pretense of employment through the escort industry in areas like Cheltenham, for example. These organizations survive on structures like labor and immigration laws that are meant to provide opportunities and protection, but are perverted to control victims and make money off of their pain. The first step in trafficking networks is recruitment, which is a procedure meant to find and take advantage of weaknesses. Traffickers target those who are in dire circumstances such as poverty, unstable homes, illiteracy, and occasionally financial hardship. They are able to take advantage of these weaknesses. They entice those who are just trying to make ends meet with promises of a better life or profession. Offers can take the shape of modeling jobs, overseas employment contracts, or even marriage proposals, all of which are meant to seem like once-in-a-lifetime opportunities. After being recruited, these traffickers try as much as possible to gain the trust of the victims. By spending time grooming, some people foster a sense of dependency by offering money or emotional assistance. Through subtle manipulation, victims come to feel cared for, only to be caught in a nightmare later on. By the time the exploitation begins, the victim is under such psychological pressure that it is almost impossible for them to leave or get assistance. The next stage is transportation. Frequently, victims are relocated across borders or from rural to urban regions where they experience increased isolation. Since traffickers frequently seize or falsify documents, victims are unable to provide identification. During transit, traffickers employ threats and intimidation to keep victims quiet, leaving them feeling confined and utterly dependent on their trafficker for safety. The long, hidden treks disorient victims and create a sense of solitude, which traffickers exploit. Once victims are relocated, the exploitation begins in earnest. Traffickers coerce victims into labor, sometimes in plain sight of society, in industries such as construction, agriculture, or domestic service. Others face much worse fates, being coerced into sexual exploitation within seemingly legal tourism and entertainment businesses. They work in these businesses under awful conditions, frequently separated from the rest of the world. Debt bondage is another strategy that traffickers employ to maintain power. Victims are persuaded they owe money for travel, food, or shelter, trapping them into endless cycles of labor under difficult conditions with no way out. With interest, these loans are impossible to repay, tying the victims to the traffickers eternally. Debt bondage is particularly prevalent among migrant workers, who are already vulnerable owing to a lack of support in a new country. Control is maintained through violence and intimidation directed not just at the victims, but also at their relatives. Physical abuse is common, but traffickers sometimes employ psychological manipulation to create terror in victims, convincing them that authorities will not rescue them or that they have no other options. They establish a universe where the trafficker is the only one in charge, which strengthens reliance and eliminates all chance of independence. This exploitation is supported by a large financial flow. Trafficking is one of the most profitable illicit industries in the world, with annual profits reaching billions. Traffickers use reputable companies, bank accounts, or even offshore enterprises to launder these funds in order to evade detection and fortify their illegal network. Traffickers have been known to operate out of luxurious penthouses in places like Cheltenham, where they can hide their victims from prying eyes and earn handsomely. Traffickers use legitimate enterprises to conceal their illegal activities and stay under the radar of police. Human trafficking is carried out through industries such as nail salons, restaurants, cleaning agencies, and even nightclubs. Traffickers have recently expanded their operations online, recruiting victims and evading law enforcement through social media and job sites. The internet has made it simpler for traffickers to connect across borders, exchange information, and monitor their activities without meeting in person. Undercover activities provide insight into these hidden worlds. In situations like the Cheltenham escort ring, detectives unearth the meticulously planned lives of women trafficked and compelled to labor. These women are held in high-security flats, where every movement is tracked and regulated. Their traffickers plan detailed travel itineraries, maintaining activities under strict control. Authorities use undercover operations to obtain information about traffickers' recruitment tactics, transportation routes, and cautious procedures for blending into society. This method goes on and on. Even the recent situation surrounding Diddy, leading to the FBI investigating him. You see, Diddy has been accused of a lot of crimes, which also involves human trafficking, using his parties and events to cover up. Survivors' stories offer a disturbing peek into the realities of human trafficking. Many victims, including Brazilian women trafficked into European brothels, face harsh working conditions and continuous threats. They are frequently forced to labor long hours without breaks, subjected to constant psychological and physical harassment. Survivors describe a society in which trust is exploited, and every attempt to flee is met with force or deception, resulting in an impossible loop to break. The testimony of former traffickers and informants exposes the horrific tactics used to control victims. When caught, several traffickers reveal how they mentally break down their captives, turning them become submissive assets. Family members of victims describe their grief and helplessness, knowing their loved ones are confined yet unable to interfere. Each perspective illustrates the layers of control and deception that traffickers use, demonstrating how sophisticated and terrible this web of exploitation is. To trace down traffickers, law enforcement agencies use cutting-edge technology and international cooperation. Surveillance technology enables them to track traffickers across borders, exposing a network far beyond the reach of local law enforcement. Dismantling trafficking rings necessitates specialized strategies, undercover personnel, and cross-border coordination. Investigators work systematically, acquiring evidence piece by piece to develop cases that are powerful enough to bring down entire networks. Challenges and conflicts. Human trafficking cases sometimes present legal issues due to a lack of concrete proof, legal loopholes, and the difficulty of relying on traumatized victims as witnesses. Even when victims are ready to testify, their remarks are often rejected due to trauma-induced fear or disorientation. This weakens the legal cases against traffickers, allowing criminals to escape long-term penalties for their crimes. Human traffickers frequently take advantage of legal ambiguities, Tourist visas, for example, allow traffickers to smuggle victims into countries without being detected. They exploit immigration and visa processes to conceal the true nature of their operations, making it more difficult for authorities to uncover trafficking. Loopholes like these make prosecution difficult, especially when traffickers blend into society and use legal papers and corporate fronts. Trafficking-affected communities experience societal stigma and isolation, making reintegration difficult for survivors. Victims are frequently criminalized or rejected for their participation in illegal industries, continuing a cycle of silence and isolation. In communities where trafficking is prevalent, crime rates tend to rise and exploitation becomes acceptable, discouraging community members from speaking up or seeking aid. Resolution: anti-trafficking legislation are expanding over the world, with the goal of holding traffickers accountable while also protecting survivors. Countries are enacting stricter sanctions for traffickers, making it more difficult for them to flee justice. Recently, legislation have evolved to focus on victim protection, with initiatives to provide resources, legal assistance, and secure places for individuals affected. Survivors are encouraged to testify without fear, and law enforcement officers are receiving specific training to recognize and respond sensitively to trafficking situations, resulting in a more survivor-centered approach that fosters trust and safety. Nonprofit organizations and community groups are filling gaps that laws may not cover. These organizations work closely with survivors, providing safe housing, counseling, job training, and other services to help them rebuild their lives. Some organizations employ digital tools to give hotlines, chat support, and online information that victims can use discreetly. Many community-based organizations have also built safe spaces where victims can share their tales and obtain support, allowing them to reclaim their lives. Online platforms and social media also play an important role in raising awareness and linking victims to rapid treatment. Innovative technology is now an essential weapon in combating trafficking. Law enforcement can detect cross-border trafficking tendencies using surveillance technology, such as AI-driven picture analysis. Data sharing across agencies provides for a better understanding of trafficker networks, even across countries. Banks and technology companies are joining the fight, analyzing suspicious financial activity and internet marketing that may entail trafficking. These collaborations between governments, NGOs, and commercial tech businesses are bringing in resources and techniques that make it more difficult for traffickers to operate in the shadows, gradually tightening the net around them. Finally, human trafficking remains one of the largest and most complex issues worldwide, affecting millions in hidden and brutal ways. From distant villages to city centers, the issue spans all demographics, and breaking these networks requires persistent effort. Awareness is key. Understanding how traffickers operate and recognizing their influence on our communities makes us all more vigilant. Each story shared and each effort made brings us closer to dismantling the layers that keep trafficking thriving in secrecy. Trafficking is preventable, and every individual has a role to play. When we raise our voices, support legislation, or even just stay informed, we are part of the solution. The fight against human trafficking calls for sustained attention and a shared commitment to build a world where every person is free from exploitation. There's more to learn, so you can expose yourself and educate others. Like, subscribe, and share this documentary to help someone who might need it. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.